Hey, everybody. I'm next door to my own classroom here in Mr. Tracy's room, and I'm going to continue my lesson in ancient China. Today, we're going to take a look at Chapter 4, Section 4, which talks about legalism and Daoism, and also Shi Huangdi, the first Chinese emperor of a unified country. At around the same time that ancient Greece was going from being Mycenaean to more based on Athens and Sparta, China had a dynasty of rulers called the Zhou dynasty. Towards the end of the Zhou dynasty, life got bad for people because they had weak rulers and there was constant fighting for power. But then a great scholar arose named Confucius. Actually, that's just what the Romans called him. And it's so Western-centric to give a Chinese person a name that the Romans would have given him. So we can actually call him by his Chinese name, Kung Fu. I know it sounds a little silly based on the fact that there's an entire martial art called Kung Fu. But Kung Fu was Confucius's real name. He wanted to bring peace and harmony back to China. He was one of those people who always says, when I was a kid, we used to have things doing this and that, and we used to be respectful to our parents, and we used to be respectful to our elders, and we used to make sure we did this and that. And yeah, that can get kind of irritating. It can get old fast, like you might think, okay, boomer. However, Confucius did it in a way that was based on trying to get results, trying to make sure that China was no longer in a nasty, brutal, chaotic, massive civil war. And so he talked about the 5 relationships. He said, if you follow the 5 relationships between human beings in the right order, then we can get back to a time of peace and prosperity. And he said that the least important of the 5 relationships between people that's still important enough to mention is the relationship between friends. That if your friend says, hey, come on, let's do something, you should help your friend, unless it goes against one of the higher relationships. The next relationship up the ladder is that between siblings, older sibling and younger sibling. And back then, things were pretty sexist, so the older male siblings are much more important. But the relationship between brothers and sisters, the older brother or sister has a responsibility of protecting the younger ones, and the younger ones have an obligation to obey the older ones. Now, even more important than the sibling-to-sibling relationship is the middle relationship in the 5, the relationship between spouses, husband and wife. Again, it's based on protection, care, and obeying. The next relationship up, the second relationship from the top, is between father and son or mother and child, that relationship between parent and their child. And again, it's based on one way being protection and care and supplying things, and the other way is based on obedience, being loyal. And then the very top relationship, and again, this one is based on the same principles as the others. The very top relationship is that between the ruler and the people. So if your friend tells you to do one thing, but your ruler says that's illegal, do this thing instead, then you should obey the ruler, because that's the number one relationship. If your parent tells you to do one thing, but your spouse says you should do another, then you listen to your parent, because parent and child is the number 2 relationship. Husband and wife or spouse to spouse is the number 3 relationship. So Confucius said if we just all follow these 5 relationships in the correct order, then there'll be no more chaos. There'll be no more civil war. Things will calm down. The country will get back to peace and stability. Confucius said that people need to obey and respect their parents, and that this relationship is called filial piety. If you're pious about something, it means you're very loyal and you believe in it like as strong as a religion. So filial piety means family loyalty, especially loyalty to your parents. Confucius, or Kung Fu, also believed that a true leader-to-subject relationship is one that involves the leader being morally good. The leader has to be a person who leads by example, someone who always says the right thing and does the right thing to inspire their people to imitate that behavior. The writings of Confucius, or Kung Fu, were collected by his students and put into a book called the Analects. Confucius believed in education. As a matter of fact, see, the funny thing was that even though Confucius wanted to be a government minister, like help a ruler run a country, for the most part, he was just a tutor. He was tutoring the sons of powerful rulers. On one occasion, he did get to be an advisor for a ruler, but it didn't last that long because he expected the ruler to be morally good all the time. And the ruler didn't want to have to be morally good all the time to live up to Confucius's ideas. So he fired Confucius when Confucius criticized him for not being as morally good as he should be. So because Confucius was so dedicated to education and dedicated to things that are morally good, eventually rulers decided that it would be wise to make their employees learn Confucianism and learn to be morally good and learn to be loyal. And so in order to get a government job, you had to take an exam on Confucianism. And the exam lasted for like 3 or 4 days. It's like SATs times 4. And interestingly, we know that some people cheated on the exam because we actually have clothing that has all up and down the sleeve that they would wear with a robe over it. All up and down the sleeve is Confucius's writings and ideas. And the person would just move their sleeve up a little bit in order to get a little reminder and then keep writing their 4-day-long test, right? Crazy. So Confucius and the rulers who followed Confucianism believed in a civil service, government employees who would work within departments, within bureaus, and be smart. They'd become experts in their field. And we call a government that's run by specialists with experts in their field a bureaucracy. And so Confucius, or Kung Fu, and the Chinese emperors who were Confucian used the civil service exam to get an educated, high-quality bureaucracy up and running. Now, there was another thinker at this time named Lao Tzu, Laozi, and Lao Tzu had a different opinion. Lao Tzu believed that nature has a flow. There's just a flow of the universe, a natural way that things go. And a lot of the time, human beings, we put our own false interpretation of the universe into effect. We don't listen and observe nature. We try to shape nature. We try to change nature. And that when we do that, we will only end up being frustrated because nature is more powerful than us. Nature has a universal flow that it works according to. And when we try to impose our own ways of doing things and our own government systems and our own social systems on nature, we'll fail. We'll just become frustrated. We'll fail. He said that this way that the universe flows, the way in Chinese is the Dao, D-A-O. It used to be spelled T-A-O back when Americans and Englishmen were first translating Chinese stuff. We thought we heard it differently, and so we wrote it out Tao, Dao, but now it's Dao, the Dao. So the Tao is the way that the universe flows. If you can tap into the way that the universe flows, if you can just slow down and understand the ways of the universe, then things will go really well for you. And you may even live longer than a normal lifespan. There are Taoist monks who claim that they're several hundred years old. And of course, there's no real verification for any of their claims. But hey, this idea that if you go with nature, if you go with the flow, it's better for you. It's an attractive way of looking at things. So if we study the Tao, if we study the way that the universe works instead of opposing it, we'll be successful in what we try to do. Because of this belief, Taoists focus on natural sciences like astronomy and medicine, learning from nature and learning from the ways of the universe. But Taoists also got suckered into believing a ridiculous science, which is called alchemy. Alchemy is the idea that you can turn things into gold. You can turn natural stuff into gold falsely. So, sorry about that, a little light filtering in from outside. Interestingly, I'm going to tell you just a little story. There was this guy, like 50 years ago, who was going to college in California. And he took a college course about Chinese philosophy with an expert, a really, really great university professor named Joseph Campbell. You can actually find some of Joseph Campbell's lectures on DVD and on video. Places like YouTube have it. So Joseph Campbell told his students in college in California about Daoism. And there was this one college student who wanted to be a filmmaker, and he decided to write a story about Daoism and set it in outer space and make it like a cowboy movie with heroes and good guys and bad guys and gunslingers, except they're shooting lasers instead of shooting 6 guns. And the bad guys are the empire and the good guys are the rebels. And the Tao is the force. So I don't know if you figured it out by now. The guy was George Lucas. And the story that he wrote about Taoism in outer space with cowboys is Star Wars. So there's another way of looking at the universe, and that's called legalism. Legalism was started by a guy named Han Feizi, H-A-N, capital F-E-I, capital T-Z-U, Han Feizi. Han Feizi said that the number one goal is to obey your ruler in everything, no matter what. If you obey your ruler, then you'll get great rewards. And if you disobey, then you will be punished harshly. This idea is called legalism. And the philosophy behind it is that, we wash our hair, right, in order to keep it clean. And yet when we wash our hair, some of our hair might fall out, but it doesn't stop us from cleaning our hair. Likewise, as a ruler looks on society, if people in society break the rules, the ruler shouldn't be afraid of losing those people by executing them. In order to keep society clean, we need to get rid of the people who will break the laws. We need to execute them. And that's what they did in legalist China. A lot of really small, really sad crimes were punished by public execution in order to convince people to obey the rules and never break them. One thing about legalism was that it was really harsh, not only about people, but about ideas too. This is a society, China under the legalists, is a society that burns books, that executes philosophers who say anything that goes against the government system. So thoughts and books are to be crushed if they don't work in favor of the ruler. There was a book of fortune. If we're going to talk a little bit more about Chinese mysticism and Chinese fortune telling, maybe, there's a book called the I Ching, capital I, capital Ching, the I Ching. And you would basically like flip coins or do something else that's random, and you would look up in the I Ching what the result of you flipping coins is, and that's your fortune. Another way of looking at life in ancient China, philosophically speaking, is the yin and the yang. These are a light and a dark swirl, and they come together to form a circle. And in the heart of the dark swoosh is a little white dot. And in the heart of the white swoosh is a little black heart spot, indicating that really they can't exist without each other. There is no good without bad. There is no light without dark. There's no male without female. There's no warm without cold. And so all these things, no light without dark, right? So the balance, the harmony of the universe is what's important. Let's talk about government, and let's talk about maybe a big construction project. In the year 221, there was a guy named Huangdi. That wasn't his real name, that was the title that he took. Shihuangdi. Shi Huangdi. And Shi Huangdi means the king of all the god kings. So, real humble guy. You can probably tell just from that this is a real guy you can pal around with. Well, he had been ruler of one of the parts of China, because China was broken up into city-states, just like ancient Greece. He was ruler of one of the city-states, and he decided to gobble up all the rest. So he very intelligently and very cunningly managed to attack the other city-states in an order that meant that he'd win every time and get stronger with every one that he'd conquer, and allow him to be stronger for the next one that he needed to conquer. So Shi Huangdi managed to unify all of China under his control in the span of like 15 years. Just dominate everywhere. He started a dynasty, the Qin dynasty, Qin, and it's actually where we get the name, China, Qin, the land of the Qin, China. So Shi Huangdi started this Qin dynasty, Qin, by defeating all the other warring states and unifying China. He doubled the size of the country by beating back invaders who came from the north and the south. He silenced all opposition against him all over China. He used a policy called strengthening the trunk by weakening the branches, meaning that rather than allowing nobles all over China to continue to run their own little regions, he forced them to move to the capital city and kept them under his watchful eye and under his control so that they couldn't lead rebellions against him. He made the central government from his capital city stronger and more powerful so that the branches of China, instead of the trunk, the branches wouldn't take power and resources away from the center, away from the emperor himself. Part of this idea of strengthening the trunk and weakening the branches was to force the nobles to live in his capital city. He was a legalist, and so he crushed all philosophy that went against legalism. He had books burnt, he had philosophers murdered, authors murdered if they said anything that went against legalism and against him. He had Confucian scholars killed because they said the ruler needs to be good. His style of government involved having total power and not allowing regions of the country to have much independence. This is called autocracy. Autocracy. He was an autocrat. During his time in charge, he forced everybody, no matter what region of China, everyone had to use the same money. And that's big because it allows you to trade back and forth between the parts of China better. Imagine if in the USA we had every single state had different currency. Like there was the North Carolina shilling and the Virginia silver dollars and the Massachusetts doubloon, right? And you had to work out exchange rates. And anytime you wanted to drive from here to Michigan or here to Illinois, every time you cross a state border, you need different money. It'd be crazy. We wouldn't be a unified country. And that's what Huangdi wanted to make China, a unified country. And so he forced all parts of China to use the same money, to make them use the same written language so that they could communicate back and forth and everyone could understand what the government writes down. The same system of weights and measurements so that if you're going to ship 100 pounds of a product from one part of China to another, it's going to be what they expect when it gets to the destination and they want to buy it. Also, he forced all roads all across China to be the same width. Because the problem is that in one part of China, you might have a wagon, like your part of China makes wagons where the wheels are 5 feet apart from each other. But you're traveling to another part of China where it's traditional for them to make the wheels 6 feet apart from each other. If you try to drive on their roads, their dirt roads, they're going to have ruts 6 feet apart. And you're going to be stuck in one rut and tilted up because your axle's only 5 feet wide. So he made all parts of China have the same axle width for vehicles and roads. He created a lot of canals so that they could trade back and forth between rivers. He also had big building projects that cost a lot of money, and he had to charge a lot of tax money to pay for these improvement projects, and he had harsh rules on the people. So because he had high taxes and harsh rules, he wasn't popular everywhere. As a matter of fact, he was unpopular most places. He did try to do something good by protecting China from northern barbarians who came down and destroyed villages and stole all the food every year after the Chinese people made them. Now, the Chinese people had built little defensive walls previously in their history, but Shi Huangdi decided that these tiny walls needed to be improved on, made taller, but also connected to each other. So he undertook a gigantic project which created, you probably guessed it by now, the Great Wall of China. So Shi Huangdi is the person who orchestrated the building of the Great Wall of China. Thousands of men were forced from all over the country to join basically prison gangs of workers and work making the Great Wall of China. And there's stories of men who died making the Great Wall, because the problem was they didn't have a ton of money, and most of the money was going into the ingredients of the wall, the materials involved. And so on many occasions, they didn't feed the people who were making the Great Wall enough food to survive. And between starvation, exhaustion, disease, whenever you get that many people together in one place, disease spreads like crazy. And so what we find is that the Great Wall of China kills a lot of the workers. And the workers actually get thrown into the wall as filler so that they don't have to use as much material in making the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China has thousands of men's dead bodies in it. Yeah, creepy. There's haunted Chinese stories, ghost stories of people who were buried in the wall and still haunt people to this day. So, Shi Huangdi wanted to live forever. And he hired scientists, chemists, to mix compounds, thinking that he could get an elixir, a drink that would make him live forever. And he found something that he thought was actually going to work: mercury. Not a good move in the end. And so Shi Huangdi dies from mercury poisoning, and his son rises up and tries to take control of the country. But the people of China, within a year or two, they really don't want him in charge. They want to forget that Shi Huangdi or anybody in his family was ever the unifier of China, because it was a really bad time. High taxes and harsh punishments and awful work gangs on construction projects. And so they kicked out his son, and that was the end of the Qin dynasty. It was short-lived. It was only one emperor plus like a year of his son before they drove him out of power and ended the Qin dynasty. China would spend a lot of time from this point forward unifying again and falling apart again, and unifying again and falling apart again, losing some of its territory to barbarians and invaders, getting completely conquered by invaders, and then having a couple of 100 years of those rulers and then kicking them out. So this has been Chapter 4, Section 4, the beginnings of Chinese history. And the next time that we study Chinese history, we're going to be looking at Chapter 7, Section 3.